Richard Calloway had everything that most people could only dream of. His empire stretched across industries, finance, real estate, luxury goods, and even technology. His name was whispered in boardrooms, printed on magazine covers, and engraved on the walls of universities he funded. To the outside world, he was untouchable. Yet, inside the sprawling Calloway mansion, his wealth, his power, his reputation, all of it seemed to crumble into dust. For the man who had conquered the world could not conquer his own failing body. It had begun as something small. Fatigue that refused to leave, a cough that lingered, an occasional tightness in his chest. At first, Richard dismissed it. He was a man of steel, a survivor of 1,000 corporate wars. But soon, the symptoms grew relentless. He could barely walk across a room without collapsing into a chair, gasping for breath. His skin grew pale, his voice thin, and his once commanding presence faded into the frailty of illness. Doctors were summoned. Not one or two, but the very best money could secure. 20 specialists, each a master in their field, arrived at the mansion. Some flew in from Switzerland, others from America, others from Japan. They carried with them cutting-edge equipment, experimental treatments, and reputations so towering that entire hospitals boasted of their affiliation. They tested him for rare infections, genetic disorders, immune system failures, and even exotic diseases picked up from his travels. They prescribed potent medicines, hooked him up to machines, and adjusted his diet with surgical precision. Every day, they hovered around him like priests at a sacred altar, whispering theories and counter-theories. And yet, nothing worked. Richard only grew weaker. His breaths came shallower, his body thinner. His once razor-sharp mind, the mind that could dismantle a company in an afternoon or seal a billion-dollar deal with one sentence, now wandered in fevered haze. In the evenings, the doctors would gather in the drawing room of the mansion, sipping brandy with furrowed brows. They debated fiercely, each certain of their own expertise, yet none willing to admit that they were utterly lost. For Maria, the maid who had worked in the Calloway household for nearly 20 years, it was agony to watch. She had seen Richard at his strongest, standing tall in crisp suits, issuing orders with a voice that could silence an entire hall. Now she saw him broken, a shadow of himself, trembling in silk sheets. Maria's job was not to intervene. Her world was the household chores, the polishing of marble floors, the dusting of chandeliers. But she had a heart, and in that heart, she carried a quiet loyalty. When she prayed at night, she prayed not for her own comfort but for her master's healing. Her daughter, Lily, often accompanied her. A bright-eyed girl of 15, she found the mansion fascinating, a world so different from the small apartment she shared with her mother. While Maria scrubbed and polished, Lily would wander the halls, curious and watchful. She didn't belong to the world of the elite, but she absorbed every detail of it with a keen intelligence that often surprised her teachers at school. Lily noticed things. She noticed how the doctors looked at each other with unease when Richard failed to respond to treatment. She noticed how her mother's hands trembled whenever she carried food into his room. And one night, when the doctors had left and the mansion had grown silent, she noticed something else, something that everyone else, blinded by arrogance or despair, had missed. She slipped quietly into the room where Richard lay. The billionaire was asleep, his breathing uneven, his lips swollen. Lily tilted her head, studying him as though he were a puzzle. She wasn't a doctor. She had no degree, no training. But she had eyes, clear, unclouded eyes. And she saw patterns where others saw only mystery. Each time she had seen him after a meal, his condition worsened. His throat tightened, his skin flushed, his breathing faltered. She frowned, chewing her lip as her mind worked. Could it be the food? The next morning, she lingered by the kitchen, watching the chefs prepare Richard's breakfast. The silver tray glistened under golden light, eggs prepared with truffle oil, imported bread, delicate fruits, and garnishes so rare that most people would never even know their names. But what caught her eye were the nuts, small, exotic, scattered as a decoration across the dish. Her heart raced. She remembered her science class, the lesson about allergies. How the body could rebel violently against something as simple as a peanut, how it could mimic illness and grow deadly with each exposure. Could this be it? Could it be so simple? She rushed to her mother, tugging at her sleeve. "Mom," she whispered urgently, "I think Mr. Calloway isn't sick like they think. I think he's allergic. Look at the food. Maria froze, torn between listening to her daughter and dismissing her. Lily, she said softly, don't speak nonsense. These doctors are the best in the world. They would know if it were something so simple. But Lily shook her head fiercely. No, Mom, they don't see it. Every time he eats, he gets worse. Look at his lips, his skin, his breathing, it's all the same. Maria hesitated, her heart pounding. She wanted to believe her daughter, but how could she, a maid, challenge the wisdom of 20 world-class doctors? What would they say if she dared to bring it up? She might lose her job, her only source of income. Yet when she looked into Lily's eyes, she saw conviction, not the fanciful imagination of a child, but the sharp clarity of truth. That night, Maria gathered her courage. She stood before the doctors, her hands trembling as she spoke. Excuse me, I think it might be the food. My daughter noticed. The room fell silent. Then came the laughter, soft but laced with arrogance. Madam, one of the doctors said with a condescending smile, we have examined every medical angle imaginable. Do you really think it could be something as trivial as food? Maria lowered her gaze, ashamed. But Lily, standing beside her, refused to back down. She stepped forward, her voice steady. You don't see it because you're looking too hard. But I've been watching. It's the nuts. Every meal has them. Every time he eats them, he gets worse. The doctors exchanged glances. Some smirked. Others sighed. But a few, the ones less blinded by pride, hesitated. What if? And so, with nothing left to lose, they agreed to remove the nuts from Richard's meals. For the first time in months, Richard's breathing steadied. His lips lost their swelling, his color returned faintly to his cheeks. The change was undeniable. And yet, no one in that room was as shocked as Richard Calloway himself, who opened his weary eyes, looked at the young girl at his bedside, and realized that the one who had saved him was not the doctors, not the empire he built, not the millions he had spent, but the maid's daughter. Richard Calloway awoke slowly, his eyes fluttering open to the soft glow of morning sunlight streaming through the tall windows of his mansion bedroom. For weeks, he had known only darkness and fevered dreams, drifting in and out of consciousness as the best doctor's money could buy failed to ease his suffering. But now, something was different. The crushing weight on his chest had lessened. His breathing came easier. His mind, though still heavy, felt clearer. And then he saw her. A girl, young, plain, with wide eyes. Filled not with pity but with quiet certainty. She wasn't dressed like the doctors or the chefs or the assistants who filled his mansion. She was ordinary, standing nervously at the edge of the room, her mother clutching her shoulder as though to hold her back. Richard blinked. Who are you? His voice was hoarse, but it carried. Lily stepped forward, her small hands clenched into fists at her sides. I'm Lily. My mother works here. And I think I figured out why you were sick. The doctors shifted uncomfortably, their polished shoes clicking against the marble floor. Some looked away. Others tried to interject, but Richard raised a trembling hand to silence them. His gaze fixed on the girl, piercing despite his weakness. Go on, he whispered. Lily swallowed hard. It was the food. The nuts. Every time they gave you meals with those nuts, you got worse. When they stopped, you started to get better. A heavy silence followed. The chandelier above seemed to cast a brighter light on her words, illuminating the truth that the 20 experts had failed to see. One of the doctors finally cleared his throat, his pride cracking under the weight of evidence. It appears the girl may be correct. An allergic reaction could explain the symptoms. Richard's lips curled into something between a laugh and a sigh. So 20 doctors missed it, he rasped, and a child saved me. Tears welled in Maria's eyes. She tried to pull Lily back, to apologize, to beg forgiveness for her daughter's boldness. But Richard shook his head weakly. No. Don't hide her. Bring her closer. Lily stepped to his bedside. Richard reached out a frail hand, his once strong fingers now thin but still commanding. She placed her hand in his, and he gripped it with surprising strength. Do you know what you've done, child? He said, his voice trembling. You gave me back my life. Not one of them, he gestured faintly toward the doctors, saw it. But you did. Lily's cheeks flushed, but her gaze didn't waver. I just noticed. That's all. Richard chuckled softly, though it turned into a cough. Noticed, that's more than what the world's best minds managed. The days that followed brought transformation. The exotic garnishes were removed from his meals entirely, replaced with simple, safe food. And with each day that passed, Richard regained more of his strength. His cheeks filled with color. His steps, though slow, became steadier. His voice regained a touch of the authority that had once shaken boardrooms. The media, however, knew nothing of the true story. To them, the billionaire's recovery was credited to the persistence of medical science and experimental treatments. That was the narrative the doctors were eager to present, desperate to protect their reputations. But Richard Calloway was not a man who hid truths, at least, not this one. At his first press conference after returning to health, he stunned the world. Standing before cameras, dressed in his signature tailored suit though still thinner than before, he raised a hand and said, "You will hear people say it was doctors who saved me. You will hear that I survived because of advanced medicine. But the truth is simpler, and far humbler. It was a girl, a maid's daughter. Her eyes saw what all the experts missed. And because she dared to speak, I am alive today." The reporters erupted with questions, but Richard said no more. The story spread like wildfire. Who was the mysterious maid's daughter who saved a billionaire? The world wanted to know. For Lily, life changed overnight. Once invisible in the shadow of wealth, she became the subject of headlines. Some mocked, calling it luck. Others praised her intuition. Schools offered her scholarships, charities reached out, and strangers sent her letters of admiration. But through it all, Lily remained humble, clinging to her mother's side, bewildered by the sudden attention. Richard, however, was not bewildered. He had made up his mind. One afternoon, still recovering but seated firmly at his desk, he summoned Maria and Lily. "Maria," he said, his tone soft but unyielding, "you've served this household faithfully for 20 years. But your daughter has given me something no amount of money could buy. She gave me life. From this day forward, I will ensure she has everything she needs to make her own." Maria gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "Sir, please, you don't need to." "I do," Richard interrupted. "And I will." He turned to Lily, his eyes sharp and kind at once. "What do you dream of, child?" Lily hesitated. No one had ever asked her that. She had dreamed quietly of becoming a doctor herself one day, of using her curiosity and keen eyes to help others. But it had always seemed impossible. I want to study. To learn. To maybe be a doctor one day." Richard's lips curled into a genuine smile. "Then you shall. I'll pay for your education, all of it. The best schools, the best universities. You will never want for opportunity again." Maria fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. Lily stood frozen, her heart pounding with hope and fear all at once. "Why would you do this for me?" she whispered. Richard leaned back, his gaze drifting toward the tall windows where sunlight poured in. "Because you saved me when no one else could. And because the world needs more eyes like yours, eyes that see what pride blinds others to." Years later, Richard Calloway would often retell the story. At charity galas, in interviews, even in board meetings, he would recall the time 20 doctors stood helpless, and a maid's daughter saved his life. To him, it was more than a story, it was a lesson. And Lily. She carried the memory with her through every exam she took, every late night of study, every challenge that threatened to overwhelm her. She would whisper to herself, "If I could see what 20 doctors missed, I can do this too." When she finally walked across the stage to receive her medical degree years later, Richard Calloway sat in the front row, clapping with tears in his eyes. He had built empires, yes. But the greatest legacy he ever helped create was not in steel or glass or numbers. It was in the heart of a girl who once dared to notice what everyone else had missed. And in that, both of their lives were forever changed.